60 AD. Nero, one of Rome's most notorious emperors, sat perched atop his indomitable throne as screams of agony and passion cried out across the blood-soaked soil of today's England. He was on the brink of losing everything that his adopted father and predecessor to the Roman Empire had so spectacularly gained. Britannia was slipping out of his desperate grasp more and more with each passing minute. The clock was ticking as loud as ever. Rome was about to be defeated not only by the likes of a rogue Celtic tribe, but a rogue Celtic woman. This, in the words of Cassius Dio, caused the greatest shame. The emperor's men, and thus his glorious empire, were being bested by a vengeful widow of a man they had once called a friend. This was the moment of truth. Rome needed a victory. But so did Boudica. Rome had began a gradual conquest of the lower portions of Britannia in the early 40s AD under the watchful eye of Emperor Claudius. The reaction of the native Britons was generally mixed, with some choosing to befriend the newcomers and others taking to battle against the invading empire. Those of the latter would meet a hardly better fate, as they would find themselves conquered in short order. But even amongst those who allied with the occupiers, sentiments of rebellion took little time to begin to simmer amongst the people. The Iceni would prove to be just one such example of this brewing problem for the Roman Empire. Upon Rome's invasion of the tribe's British lands, the Iceni, according to Roman historian Tacitus, came to a voluntary agreement with Emperor Claudius, thus forming an alliance with the Romans and becoming a somewhat privileged, independent client state of the attacking empire. Who was king of the Iceni tribe at this time is a fact left only for those who lived it. But historians generally believe that if it was not Prasutagus who submitted to the Romans himself, then it was after a brief revolt by the Iceni in 47 AD that the now famous king was installed by Rome as a puppet king. Neither option changes the fact that the man we know now as Prasutagus was an Iceni king of quite friendly relations with the Roman Empire. Upon his death, the Celtic monarch left half of his kingdom to his teenage daughters and the other half to the new Roman emperor, Emperor Nero. This was meant to secure both his royal lineage within his tribe and also the allyship and favor of Rome. Prasutagus was, however, a naive man. The Romans were never the sharing type, nor was it within their character to be more respectful of their conquered peoples than they were required to be. The choice by the Iceni king to give only half of his holdings to Nero was seen not as a gift, but as an insolent snub to the Roman emperor of all people. Thus, Prasutagus' will was ignored entirely, and this triggered a crucial chain of events that would lead Rome and the Iceni into a twisted dance of war and death, stoppable only by more of the like. Reacting to the news of the Celtic king's death and his irrelevant wishes for his kingdom, many unfortunate happenings occurred all at once by Roman hands. The Iceni lands were seized for the empire. Iceni people were captured for slavery, unpayable loans were coincidentally called in, and most infamous of these acts, Prasutagus' grieving widow was flogged for all the public to see, and her daughters defiled in front of all who could bear to watch. These brutal acts of alleged justice by Rome did little more than to provoke the Iceni people into a state of violent indignation. Their queen, Prasutagus' widow Boudica, was a woman of more vengeance than forgiveness, and her people now stood vehemently behind her. Rome no matter how big, no matter how powerful, could not go unpunished. Boudica would be the chosen ruler to lead the Celts to their retribution. Not much is known for certain about this warrior woman of Britannia, but it is believed that she was born to a noble family, possibly around 30 AD, in or near the town of Camulodunum. This is just speculation, however, as is the suggestion that she may have been born to a tribe other than the Iceni. Nevertheless, by the time she married Prasutagus, likely around the age of 18, none of that would matter any longer, and neither would she be remembered for her early life, but instead for her actions that were to come as she readied for a war of vengeance and honor against one of the world's most powerful empires. Boudica would begin her campaign at the helm of her Iceni subjects, but furthermore with the support of additional scorned Celtic tribes such as the Trinovantes, whom historians believe were forced out of their homes and town at Camulodunum to make room for a fortress and Roman war veterans that the empire were hoping to appease. Similar sympathies could be found across the Britannic tribes as a result of Roman occupation and conquest, leading to increased support for the warrior queen and her outraged people. In a surely unintentional choice by Rome to add an overfilled bucket of fresh gasoline to the raging Celtic fire, Roman governor and commander Gaius Suetonius Paulinus was currently leading his men most unforgivingly against the people of the island of Mona, a place home to revered druids, the high-class priests of the Celtic world. One could say that this was the tipping point for Boudica and her rebels, but in truth, it was not needed. What had been done already had pushed them far over the edge of any level of acceptance, and there was never a thought of turning back. Boudica's first place of attack would be the stolen Trinovante land of Camulodunum. The colony was left open with no fortified city wall, nor a Roman force worth any value to protect it. Nothing more than the veterans themselves and an attempted relief from one Quintus Petilius Cerialis and his 9th Legion to stand in the way of Boudica's wrath. And thus, on a date unbeknownst to us but ingrained forever in the minds of all who were there that day, the Iceni and their allies, rallying behind their warrior queen, turns the colony of Camulodunum into first a butcher shop and next a fiery graveyard. Boudica led her men on an utter rampage. Roman sources claim that anywhere between 120,000 warriors followed her lead as the massacre began. As the vexed tribesmen entered Camulodunum, the veteran soldiers of the colony scrambled to defend themselves. They called upon the absent Suetonius Paulinus, forlornly pleading for aid, but it was already too late. Boudica ensured the extermination of every last Roman she or her soldiers laid their incandescent eyes on. There was no mercy in the minds of the Celts, and only a few hundred Roman fighters stood no honorable chance against Boudica's tens of thousands. Quintus Petilius Cerialis and his 9th Legion of 2,500 men would hope in shameful vain that their presence would bring favor for the Romans, but their presence wouldn't even come while the men still breathed. Those colony members who had survived the initial slaughter hid themselves in the magnificent Roman exhibit of the Temple of Claudius, built beautifully of signature Roman stone and in honor of the deceased and glorified Emperor Claudius. The temple would stand as the final safe haven for the doomed citizens of Camulodunum. And after a siege of 2 days, the Iceni were ready to seal their fate. The colony was lit ablaze. Flames rushed through the abandoned homes, public spaces, and all that the Romans had so proudly built. Acrid smoke filled the air and seeped into the emperor's temple as one by one the remaining civilians lost consciousness. As the crackling fire now reached the doors of the temple, all but the flames themselves fell silent. it was all over for Camulodunum. Petilios Cerealis had been far too late. He and his soldiers were still on the road to the colony of ashes when Boudica stumbled upon them. The 9th Legion met a similar doom as the veterans of Camulodunum, just without fire. Cerealis' 2,500 simply collapsed under the unassailable force of the Britons. A scarce few cavalrymen managed to escape with their lives alongside Cerealis himself. The road to Londinium was now wide open. The victorious Iceni and co. were only just beginning their campaign of vengeance and resistance. The terror they had wrought at Camulodunum sent shockwaves through Rome, and pride and hope through the Celts. This was about more than just revenge. It was about freedom. It was about taking back what the Britons had once held as their own, and it was a reality check for the mighty Romans. Suetonius Paulinus was one such Roman who caught word of the jarring liquidation of Camulodunum and the 9th Legion. Stunned and outraged, Paulinus prepared a garrison to handle ongoing matters on the island of Mona, while he and detachments from his 20th Legion began the frantic journey toward the source of the Roman despair, Boudica. With his 14th Legion following close behind, Paulinus soon made his way past the haunting residual embers and corpses of Camulodunum. They were rushing toward Londinium. This was where the rebel woman would strike next, and this was where Rome must defend. But not all of Rome was keen on doing just that. Suetonius was on this journey alone, with no reinforcements at hand and only around 5,000 men of his own. This was but a bee sting in the way of Britons, and Suetonius Paulinus was in no mood to die for naught. Once at Londinium, the commander rallied all of his men and the citizens of the city to follow him and evacuate the vicinity. Many joined and fled, while those who remained were treated with a conclusive absence of kindness. Cassius Dio spared no word in describing the actions of Boudica's men against all who did not retreat. They hung up naked the noblest and most distinguished. Afterwards, they impaled the woman on sharp skewers run lengthwise through the entire body. Enslaved Celtic tribesmen of the city were additionally freed, only bolstering Boudica's already advantageous manpower. And with this new, even mightier display of numbers, the freedom fighters and their queen were off, now to Verulamium. Whether or not the rampageous Iceni fully scorched and destroyed Verulamium is unknown to scholars today, as much of the physical evidence left behind only indicates a partial ruination. This is likely due to the fact that the town was home to the Catuvellauni tribe, Britons, like the Iceni, but sympathetic to the Roman cause. And as such, Boudica may have only targeted structures and citizens of Verulamium that were clearly Roman-influenced, or she may have torched it entirely. Either way, the town became another victim of the warrior queen and her men as they continued their glorious war march through England's southeast. It's stated by Tacitus that by now, somewhere near 70,000 Romans had met their wicked end at the hands of Boudica's army. Abroad, Emperor Nero had received all the news he could bear. Whatever mixture of logic and ego he had swirling around in his own twisted mind was about to bubble over. The thought of wholly withdrawing his troops from Britannia was beginning to appear the best option at hand. Rome couldn't lose again to a soiree of angry Celts, let alone one being hosted by a woman. To pull out of the region entirely would at least be a choice for Rome by Rome, and the dismayed emperor could manage to save face, even if only a sliver. If this was Nero's ultimate decision, however, it was not acted upon. Instead, Suetonius Paulinus had a newfound confidence that he had chosen to act on. The Romans, after all, were better equipped, better organized, and better trained. They may have stood no chance against Boudica and her appalling numerical superiority at Londinium or even Verulamium, but Paulinus felt that this was a temporary fact. All he needed was an advantageous battle position, nothing more. With this, he forcefully insisted that he could not only vanquish the Britons now, but he could prove a crucial point in their minds going forward. Resistance was futile. Thus, as Boudica led her warriors triumphantly somewhere along what we know today as Watling Street, battle-ready and brimming with the passion of a woman scorned and avenged by her own hand, General Paulinus was dauntlessly readying his timorous men for either victory or death. Where exactly along Watling Street the paths of Boudica and Suetonius Paulinus crossed, we do not know, but we can say this. Paulinus had chosen the battlefield, and he had picked a site that allowed his 14th and 20th legions and allied Roman veterans to be surrounded by Mother Nature on all sides but one. Neatly packed between a backdrop of woodlands and a small passage that opened only to a vast plain in front, removing any possibility by Boudica of an ambush or otherwise surprise. Paulinus was ready. He had given his roughly 10,000 soldiers the speech of a lifetime, reminding them of their identities as Romans and their abilities based on such. This would be the fight of their life. They were facing an estimated 230,000 Celts emblazoned by fury, pride, and an unquenchable thirst for freedom. They too had received a motivational speech of legendary proportions from their own commander, Queen Boudica herself. They would be fighting for their lives, while the Romans were merely fighting for Rome, in what appeared to be a horrifically predictable losing battle. But General Paulinus was a persuasive man and an intelligent military commander. What he was about to do was both foolhardy and insanely astute all at once. The Romans, decked from head to war-weary toe in full body armor, massive shields, and whetted swords and spears, donned their battle positions. The Britons, much less protected or armed, came dressed in confidence. Behind them were wagons of their families, ready to celebrate all together after the crushing conquest they were about to beget. The clock stopped its ticking. The time was now. Suetonius Paulinus arranged his legionaries like canned sardines. They were tightly packed together in a sliver of land they occupied before the opening of the field, crouched shoulder to shoulder with their shields at the ready, forming an armored shell around them. The cavalry was positioned on the wings, with the auxilia infantry on the flanks. The Celts, on the other hand, were far less organized, though their sheer numbers would give the impression that this was inconsequential. And so, as Boudica led her men into a passionate charge toward the waiting Romans, the latter sat motionless, seemingly foreshadowing the end that the Britons so surely anticipated would soon come. But as the Celts closed in, the Romans launched a downpour of spears, raining a violent death down on Boudica's men as their lack of proper armor welcomed the sharp spear tips directly into their persons. Many instantly fell to the foot-flattened ground, gravely wounded or already dead. The rest, at the alarmed order of the Queen, desperately pulled back, but only temporarily. They quickly launched themselves back at the wall of shields in a thunderous battery, this time hoping to have exhausted the Roman spears, forcing the fight into close combat. This is what happened, but the Romans would still overpower the Britons, switching to their shining swords and slicing right through the assaulting Celts. General Paulinus then shouted for his men to push forward, moving onto the offensive. Shifting into a more triangular formation, the Romans pounced. This would be the shot to the head for Boudicca's army. The Celts, though vastly outnumbering the Romans to begin the clash, were now wasting away under the ferocious pressure of the enemy's shrewd charge. Boudicca's hopes and dreams, her pride that had thus far swelled to such magnificent heights, the satisfaction of meaningful vengeance felt by the Iceni and their allies, and the confidence of a winning revolution were all crumbling, slipping through her bloodied fingers as she tried in vain to hold onto any semblance of victory left. She just couldn't. It was all over. As the surviving Britons scrambled to escape the Roman blades, many became caught up in the chain of wagons, filled with the horrified children and wives of the fallen soldiers, blocking any valuable exit route. Some did manage to slip through, such as Boudicca herself, but the rest, tens of thousands, were brutally slain. The Romans spared no one, not man, nor woman, nor baggage animal, whether fighting or fleeing. The massacre left the open land soaked in the blood of the Celtic people and only a few hundred Romans. When the butchery finally came to an end and the valley fell eerily silent, the true grisly scale of what had just occurred could at last be understood. The bodies of the Iceni and all those who had risked their lives to aid in the feverish rebellion now littered the blood-stained grass. The fatigued Roman victors stood wherever their feet could still feel the earth below them, catching their breath and inspecting the aftermath of the vigorous battle. Despite what seemed to be against all odds, their meager 10,000 had routed a force with over 10 times their men and a fiery passion that few motives could evoke in a man. But Rome had won. They had won the battle, and with it, they had won the war. The war for Britannia, for now, was over. As for Boudicca, although she survived the disastrous trouncing, one theory suggests that her honor had not made it out alive with her. Tacitus posits that in the wake of her rebellion's mortifying end, Boudicca chose death by poison over a life of disgrace. Cassius Dio, contrarily, believes that she instead succumbs to illness before she could rally what remained of her troops for a renewed campaign against their conquerors. Whether by poison or sickness, however, Boudicca did die following her brutal defeat at Watling Street, and her impassioned spirit would fizzle out with her life. The Iceni revolt was over. The Britons were defeated. Rome secured Britannia. The clock was reset, and Nero could breathe a long-held sigh of relief.